Thank you, Tim, and I really appreciate all of you being here. So we're in the middle of what is a very successful summer league here in Las Vegas. This was a league that started 14 years ago, but now has 30 teams for the very first time. I've been over several times at the Thomas and Mack Arena. It's sort of a very engaged crowd there. Lots of team folks there as well. It's interesting, we have roughly 3,000 people in town for the Summer League, combination of league folks, team, media members, and others who put on a tech fair around the Summer League as well. And I was sitting with Jim Murin on Sunday, who's the CEO of MGM, and of course it's the MGM Las Vegas Summer League now. And we were saying we're accounting for 27,000 room nights now in Las Vegas in the month of July. So I feel like we have a franchise in Las Vegas right now. It's the MGM NBA Summer League, and we're thrilled with it. We also had earlier this month 2 other summer leagues. For the first time in Sacramento, they had what they're calling the California Classic. They had 4 teams there over 3 days, and they exceeded all expectations. They had 50,000 fans there in Sacramento for that league. So, hats off to Vivek Ranadive and his organization, and we've already begun talking to them about how we can build that into a larger event in the future. And Utah, who had brought back their summer league, had a 4-team, 3-day league as well, and they had roughly 35,000 people at their summer league. And so it's been fantastic from a programming standpoint. Here in Las Vegas, we're gonna have 82 games in the arena, and also which will be televised on ESPN and NBA TV, and to all our global partners as well. So, for basketball junkies, it's been a lot of fun. We've had virtually all of our top draft picks here, and many returning players as well. And of course, you see just how difficult it is to make this league when you see how much talent there is out on the floor. I just came this afternoon from our NBA Board of Governors meeting here at the Wynn Hotel. We had very productive meetings. Happy to answer questions about what was discussed, but talked about competition largely, talked about Supreme Court decision on gaming and what that means for the league. We talked about our basketball operations department. Byron Spruell talked about sort of developments on the officiating side. And as you might imagine, the owners were very focused on the competitive landscape as well. So I'd say we had a very robust discussion on that. And lastly, I'll just say before I answer questions that I couldn't be more encouraged about where we are as a league. We came off a fantastic season, 2 7-game conference finals for the first time in almost 40 years, hard-fought finals. Again, congratulations to Golden State Warriors on their championship, and the Cleveland Cavaliers for being in the finals, and of course LeBron for being in 8 consecutive finals. It's a remarkable accomplishment. Having said that, there's work to be done. I think there's even more we can do to improve the competitive landscape in this league. It's something that we will continue to talk about together with our Labor Relations Committee, which is chaired by Michael Jordan. We had a meeting this morning discussing some of the competitive issues, and I'd say we've been very engaged with the Players Association, and I think we have a particularly productive relationship with them, and I believe at the end of the day they have the same interest we do in creating the best competition possible. You have 450 of the best basketball players in the world, and they all want to compete for championships too. So, I don't have anything precise in mind other than engaging with the Players Association and talking about how we can improve things. There's always the next collective bargaining agreement, but I think in addition that we've developed a certain rapport with the Players Association where I feel we can talk about anything at any time. And, again, there's a lot of goodwill on both sides of the table, and I think that's what leads to strong relationships. So, and with that, happy to answer any questions.
All right, we'll start with Rick Bonnell, second row here, third in.
Hey, Adam, I wondered if you could talk about what Michael brings to that job, chairing the Labor Relations Committee, and also I was curious if there was anything particularly new with the preparations for All-Star Weekend.
So it's so unique to have Michael Jordan as the chair of your Labor Relations Committee. I think, first of all, it says so much about this league that Michael Jordan is a principal governor/owner in this league. I think that there's no doubt that so many players look up to him. I think many of our current class of superstars look across the table and think that's where I want to be one day. In addition to having been a great player, the opportunity to be a majority owner of a team or to partner in a team is something I think a lot of them think about. So he brings unique credibility to the table when we're having discussions with an owner, and also even when it's discussions just among owners, he's able to represent a player point of view, and so that when players are going in discussion, when owners are going in discussions with players, they know Michael's able to say, well, look, this is how I looked at it when I was a player, and these are the kinds of issues we need to address if we're going to convince players that this is something that's in everyone's interest. And again, I think he's particularly thoughtful on these issues. Again, he has such a unique perspective, and I think when you have one of the greatest ever, I think just sort of who evolved, from, one of the best obviously ever players into being an NBA owner. I can't think of any other precedent for that in sports. In terms of All-Star Weekend, we're spending a lot of time with the Hornets organization, of course with Fred Whitfield and Michael as well, on just how to make it into a spectacular event. We want to make sure we do things that are unique for North Carolina and for Charlotte, and I'd say there's a lot of excitement around the league building towards that weekend.
Second row, second in, Tim.
Hey, Adam. Tim Reynolds with the Associated Press. You alluded to it in your opening remarks, but can you kind of update us on what the discussion was about the Supreme Court decision on gambling, what the owners feel about what the potential for that is, and since you last spoke to us at the finals, has there been really anything new as far as the progress toward that 1% benchmark that I know you all are hoping for?
Sure. So there was a dual presentation. One was on the state of the law and what's happening across the country. There's roughly 20 states in some stage of passing legalized sports betting, and so there was a state-by-state update on where those things stand and what the particular law will mean to the NBA. Related to that is the so-called integrity fee or royalty that the league has talked about. Frankly, it's not a place we've made a lot of progress. It's one of the issues we're talking to states about. We're also very focused on how the data will be used and how we can protect the integrity of the league, and we've made more progress in some of those other issues. I'll say, I mentioned this during the finals, that in addition to working with the state legislatures, we're also talking directly to the gaming establishments about entering into commercial deals. And we were asked our view on that legislation. It wasn't something we were promoting. My preference all along has been to have consistent federal framework, but to the extent states were asking us our opinion, we were offering it. But my view is we should be compensated for our intellectual property, but we can do that directly, again, with commercial relationships with gaming establishments. And in fact, even while I've been in town the last few days, I've had some discussions with some of the operators here about that. And so that's where things stand. I think, in addition to the legal presentation, we had a presentation on what we see are the commercial opportunities. When we look out into the future in terms of how our broadcast will look, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of how potentially gaming opportunities will be integrated into telecast, but there's a lot of issues around that. How exactly our broadcasters will present that information. We need to be mindful, again, of who our audience is, young people watching games, how directly we as a league should be in that business. There's a lot of issues on the table, I'd say, but we have a lot of business talent in the room with our governors, whether it's Tillman Fertitta, who's in the casino business himself, or Dan Gilbert, or Steve Ballmer, based on his background in terms of technology, Ted Leonsis. I mean, I could go on and on, Jim Dolan. There's people who are in the media business and who also understand how big data works, understand how gaming relationships work. And given that we have our long-term television relationships, it's more us saying as an ownership group, let's step back and really study these issues and try to understand them and see what the best ultimate consumer experience can be, and at the same time balanced against protecting the integrity of the league.
Second row on your left, Mark.
Mark Anderson, Las Vegas Street Journal. You talked about a little bit earlier about the success of the summer leagues. from that and free agency and the draft, you've been in the news a lot. How important is that for the league to be so relevant this time of year? And how much did you borrow from the NFL as far as encroaching, I guess, on the whole calendar?
I begin by saying we borrow from everyone. Thank you. We learn from other leagues. We watch what they do. We watch what other entertainment organizations do, and we're thrilled. I mean, I don't like to necessarily measure it being in the news. That's not always so positive, but we think that it's been largely positive, that people are following the league. They're fascinated with the draft and the next class of players coming in and player movement as well. I mean, we're seeing with these summer leagues, again now with 30 teams and looking at the ratings on ESPN and NBA TV, you see clearly there's a big audience out there who's just fascinated with, loves basketball, loves seeing this next group of players coming into the league, loves sort of the social media chatter on whether it's where players are moved to or what the impact is going to be and how they're spending their summer. On top of that, we're discussion about what the G League should look like. I should mention we have a WNBA team here in Las Vegas, of course, the Aces. Been a lot of interest in that team as well. So, I'd say from a business and basketball standpoint, we really love it. We love the engagement. I recognize that some of it is outside of our control. You happen to hit a particular news cycle, or obviously LeBron being a free agent is going to be a big deal, to sports fans everywhere, even casual fans, and we're enjoying it.
Third row in the middle, Steve.
Steve Ashburner, NBA.com. Michelle Roberts told us today that competitive balance is not a concern of the unions, and she said she'd be surprised if she got a phone call from you sort of identifying it as an issue. But it came up in June when people wondered about the same two teams playing in 4 straight finals, and it's come up now with free agency and some of the places the talent has gone. Can you characterize where it stands? I know you talked about it a little bit in your opening remark and how some of the owners feel.
Sure. I mean, Michelle's not going to get a call from me complaining about competitive balance. I accept her point of view. It's not necessarily her issue. I think it's on me and our Labor Relations Committee ultimately to sit with the players and their committee and convince them that there may be a better way of doing things. I mean, by that meaning change ultimately in the collective bargaining agreement. I mean, collective bargaining agreements are contracts like any others. They have expirations, or you can amend them as you go. And so I'm not here to say we have a problem, but I love where the league is right now. But as I said earlier, I think we can create a better system. We learn from each successive deal. We try new things. We make predictions about how caps and exceptions will work. We have great economists who come in on our side of the table. The union does as well, but it's not a perfect science, and trying to predict the behavior of our teams, and things change in the marketplace as well. So I don't necessarily think it's per se bad that the Warriors are so dominant. As I've said before, we're not trying to create some sort of forced parity. What we really focus on is parity of opportunity. And a fair point could be made in a tax system when certain teams are spending significantly more than others, that's not parity of opportunity. And also certain teams have advantages that other teams don't, that based on the resources in the market, the wealth of the market, and they may be in a position to go deeper into the tax than another team does. I mean, so dynasties are nothing new in this league. There's a long history of it, and I also think it's hard to make comparisons to other sports, because in the NBA, where superstar players are on the floor roughly 80% of the time, obviously play offense and defense, there's only 4 other teammates on the floor, they can be that much more dominant than even a great quarterback that is only on the field half the time and then has many more teammates, or a great NHL player who's on the ice roughly 30% of the time. So there are unique issues. And even as I said during the finals, LeBron had 59 different teammates over 8 years. So we recognize that great players, superstar players, are going to have a unique ability to impact games. But having said that, there are changes we can make to the system that I think will create more competitive balance and more equality of opportunity, and those are things we look at. And the discussion in the room, again, people weren't coming in necessarily complaining, but as good business people do, they're looking out to the future and saying, how can we improve things? And what I point out is because I feel we have a respectful, productive relationship with Michelle, with Chris Paul, and the rest of the Players Association, that everybody is saying to each other, we're happy to talk about these issues, and let's model it, let's look at other ways of doing it. And as I've said, I recognize what Michelle is saying, but at the same time, if you talk to players in the league, and I talk to plenty of individual players as well, they want to be in the most competitive league possible too. But let me make clear that under the current system right now, we want teams to compete like crazy. So I think the Warriors, within the framework of this deal, should be doing everything they can to increase their dominance. That's what you want to see in a league. You want teams to compete in every way they can within the rules, and if it makes sense to make some adjustments in the rules next time, we'll look at that.
Second row in the middle, Ohm.
Adam Ohm, Youngstook, ESPN. I was wondering to follow up on that. Did the competition committee or the owners discuss anything about the playoff format, about maybe altering that a little bit? And also, is there any update on the eligibility rules for 2021 or the one-and-done rule, anything being done about that? And then one more question. There are more women officiating here at Summer League, and I know that was part of an initiative that you wanted to see more women in addition to women in coaching ranks, but in officiating. I was wondering how soon you might expect more women to be officiating at the NBA level as well.
Sure, so I'll begin with your last question. So in terms of women moving into the officiating ranks, we're thrilled that roughly 50% of the women here in 50% of the officials here in training camp are women. It's what you'd like to see if women, of course, are 50% of the population. And so we have, I think, 19 women here in training camp. I mean, and we were pleased to see, of course, we had 2 women on the floor the other night for one of the games. It's a process, bringing women into the officiating ranks, getting more women ultimately as NBA officials. The way the development works now is all our current officials move through the G League before they come into the NBA, and we expect to hire significant numbers of women into the G League development path coming out of this summer league this fall. So it takes a little bit of time, but to me, it's a bit embarrassing that we only have one working woman in our officiating ranks right now. There's no physical reason why that's the case. It's just the way things have grown up in the league, but we're determined to change that as quickly as possible. And we've made Byron Spruell and Michelle Johnson and Monty McCutcheon have gone out and really doubled down on the recruitment of women into the officiating ranks to point out what a great profession this can be for people, and we're seeing those results. And you had 2 other questions. So the other was on the first on the age I'll deal with. So we did discuss that both with the Labor Relations Committee and with the board. And the sense was we should be engaging with the Players Association on the minimum age to come into the NBA. And we presented the pros and cons on going from 19 to 18. In conjunction with that presentation, we discussed a lot about the development of younger players prior to them coming into the professional ranks. I mean, we've had several discussions with both the NCAA and USA Basketball about engaging with them, with players beginning, roughly at 14 years old, and especially with those elite players who we know statistically have a high likelihood when they're identified at that age of being top-tier players of coming into the league. So I think the next step will be to sit down with the Players Association. Of course, it has to be collectively bargained if we're going to lower the age. So that's something we will begin to discuss with them. But my personal view is that we're ready to make that change. That it won't come immediately, but that when I've weighed the pros and cons, that given that Condoleezza Rice and her commission has recommended to the NBA that those one-and-done players now come directly into the league, and in essence the college community is saying we do not want those players anymore, I think that sort of tips the scale in my mind that we should be taking a serious look at lowering our age to 18. The other issue in terms of seeding of the playoffs, it's a discussion we've had with our board before. We continued it today, and I've said before that the most significant obstacle to seeding 1 through 16, as appealing as that would be to me and I think a lot of fans, is the dramatic increase in travel that would follow. I mean, and our estimates are if we seed 1 through 16 in the playoffs, we could be looking at roughly 40 to 50% more travel, and it would affect teams disproportionately. Those on the coast would travel more than those in the middle of the country. And we've spent a lot of time in the last few years trying to spread out back-to-back, and to reduce the number of back-to-backs, to reduce the amount of fatigue on players based on crossing time zones. So obviously, if we were to make that change, it would work in the other direction. It doesn't mean we can't, but it's not something we could do quickly, because it would require really a wholesale re-examination of how we do the schedule, how our television deal works, you know, in terms of the spacing of the games in the playoffs. So we're going to look at it. I think it has a real appeal to ownership, and I know it does to fans. It's just not such an easy thing to implement.
Third row, third one in, Mark.
Hey, Mark Medina, Bay Area News Group. Commissioner Silver, regarding the competitive balance issue, are there any ideas in particular that have resonated with you that could be realistic proposals on that front?
No new ideas. You know, as I mentioned during the finals, you know, we have a very soft cap right now. And I think the question is, are there ways to enhance competition, you know, based on creating more sort of a level playing field in terms of number of chips each team has, and whether if certain changes we made would increase competition around the league. And those are the kinds of models that we're going to continue to look at. But I'm open to other ideas as well, and I'm sure, you know, once we sit down with the Players Association and again with our Labor Relations Committee, you know, we've brought in outside experts to look at those kind of issues. And as I've said, we've modeled these things in the past, and it doesn't always work out the way you predict. But, you know, I'm fairly confident that if we sort of put the best basketball minds to work here, that we can do more to, you know, to create more competition league-wide.
Going to take two more, starting in the second row with Rachel.
Rachel Nichols from ESPN. Two questions different in tone, so I'll
Thank you.
let you pick which one you want to go for. On a lighter note, have you guys considered, and how close are you considering moving the start of free agency from, I don't know, midnight to, let's say, 6, 7 p.m.?
Right.
Just considering sort of all the attention and television and everything else around it. And then more seriously, I would love an update on where the Mavericks investigation stands.
Sure. On the first issue, in terms of when free agency begins, I've not only heard from my friends in the media, but as I get older and the people I grew up in the NBA get older, I think we're all tired of all-nighters. And what I've heard from, again, several of my colleagues at teams are, does this really need to be at midnight? And so I think that's something that we would need to find agreement on with the Players Association, but I think we could change for next year. It's one of those things that everybody looks at each other and says, why has it always been that way? It's unclear, it's just been at midnight. But I think we could, one, I mean, putting aside the impact on the working media, I think there's so much interest in it. You know, clearly if it were happening at a more reasonable time, it would be better for coverage. But again, I think it also is, maybe it was kind of fun in the old days, like scheduling the meetings at midnight or whatever else, but I think we're past that. So I expect a change for next season. In terms of the Mavericks investigation, the last report I got, which was very recent, is they expect to complete the investigation by the end of this month, by the end of July.
Final question in the middle, Mark.
Mark Spears, the Undefeated. Have you had a chance to visit with Sterling Brown since you've been here, and what are your latest thoughts about his situation? There was also a Facebook post that was pretty disturbing from some of the cops as well.
No, I haven't had a chance to see Sterling since I've been here in the last few days, and you know, my view hasn't changed. I saw that Facebook post, and not only was it shocking to see, but I was surprised that the police chief came out and said that he hadn't seen it either. So I don't really understand what happened there and how that came to be. So it is something that we will continue to look at. You know, I don't have any more words to express how disheartening it is to see, and I maybe just conclude by saying, you know, I'm still incredibly proud of the work that our players are doing in this area, you know, not just the Brown family, but how many of our players are engaged with you know, social activism, and in a very constructive way, focused on what we can do to improve our communities. And I think with so much negativity around that, I look at this league and other sports leagues too, and other athletes, that I think people are looking to the NBA and to other institutions like ours to say, you know, is there a way to come together to really try to solve problems? And I think this league is in a unique position to add in a very constructive way to the conversation that our country is having. It's been a long tradition in this league, and again, our players now, the ones who are in the league, and even as I spent the day with the draft class that came in, it's part of their DNA, and they come into this league with sort of eyes wide open. They understand the platform and the attention that being an NBA player provides to them, and they want to do good. And I think, you know, as tragic as that situation is, and as you know, the Bucks are very focused on it as well, how can we use that as an opportunity to draw attention on that issue in the first instance, and then, you know, work towards positive change.
All right. Thank you, Adam, and thanks for all of you